Hello again. Continuing in the series of military aviation books. And the ones I'm going to talk about today were written by Ed Macey, which is the pen name of a chap who his background was in the parachute regiment. And he was actually training for SAS selection when he had an accident. He was on his bicycle, he was hit by a car and suffered multiple injuries, which put paid to his chances of joining Special Forces. So he decided to retrain as a helicopter pilot. And this whole story is recounted in this book, Hellfire, which is actually his second book, but chronologically it's at the start of his helicopter career. So the book takes you through the training program for the Army Air Corps helicopters. Now, in the UK, as in America, attack helicopters are operated by the Army, and troop-carrying cargo helicopters are operated by the Air Force. So he joined the Army Air Corps to fly helicopters. And he takes you step by step right through the program, from basic fixed wing right through flying helicopters up to the Gazelle, which he flew operationally. Very, very difficult aircraft to fly. The helicopter requires tremendous coordination, physical coordination, and he describes it in really good detail. And it's also interesting because it's the Army process, how the Army train you to do something. And they have a chop rate or a failure rate, which is very, very high. They keep high standards, and you don't really have a lot of time to progress through the various wickets to become the pilot. So it's very much things are crammed in. You're expected to keep up with the course. So he starts flying operationally, and this is peacetime except for Northern Ireland. And while he's flying in Northern Ireland, which is supporting troops on the ground, he uses his tactical skill from being an infantry soldier himself in the paras. And this is noticed by some of the other chaps in the flight, and he's encouraged to write a book on tactics, on how to fly air support for ground operations. And he puts it together, and an officer very helpfully offers to help him with the grammar and the structure of the book, and then publishes it himself and takes full credit for him. Officers again. So to cut a very long story short, his ambition is to fly the Apache, which is the attack helicopter, which was adopted quite controversially, really, by the British. And we produced our own version of it, which in many ways is an improvement over the original. And again, Ed takes you through the training to become an Apache pilot or Apache crewman, because there's two pilots. And it is so interesting, so complicated, and such an absolutely stringent program, which only a very tiny percentage of human beings would be able to pass, because the complexity of flying the Apache is amazing. And I had a chance at one of the air shows. I was doing security for Boeing, and one of my colleagues was working for MacDac, which was McDonnell Douglas before they were absorbed by Boeing, and they had the Apache, and I had a chance to look over it, and they showed us the weaponry and everything on it, and it was fascinating aircraft. And but I never realized a tenth of just how complex it is. Now, the weaponry apart, just the communication equipment in it, the pilot has several radios, at least 3, to my knowledge, operating between the aircraft in the flight to headquarters and within the aircraft. He also has a text pad on his thigh where he can send text messages, and he's got to know instantly the meaning of all the code names that come over. So if he's told that there's fast air coming in and it's Leopard 5, he knows that is a German F-15 carrying a certain ordnance load, and he has to know that instantly and know all the safety aspects of that. So fantastically just on that. And then on top of that, you have the special helmet, which everyone who knows about the Apache, you know that they've got this helmet with a monocular, and when the pilot turns his head, the cannon, the chin mounted cannon follows. Looks could kill. And that has a monocular over the right eye, which is 1 inch from the eyeball, which displays digital information continually strolling, and you've got to be able to understand that and take it and respond to it. Meanwhile, your other eye is focused on infinity. So you've got one eyeball looking 1 inch and the other one looking at infinity outside of the cockpit or at the displays within the cockpit or the television monitor. And this in itself is an amazing mental process. And he found out he could actually, because your eyes, they don't want to do this. There's a thing called monocular rivalry. And your eyes are supposed to work together. And the Apache pilots have to train to look in different ways, like, some sort of chameleon. And he could actually read 2 different books at the same time. It's amazing. Now, you've got to do all this, take all this information, all the different radios, all the different codes, and the information coming in through the monocular and cockpit instruments while flying, fighting and defending the aircraft over hostile territory. So it's really is. It's a real example of what the human being can do under stress. And I think it either highlights or makes a mockery of some of the theories about what you can do under stress. That the brain has a lot of capacity and a lot of capability to do this. Anyway, so he deploys to Afghanistan, and the main part of the book is flying operations in support of the troops on the ground there, over these Lashkar and Nowzad and places like that. And a lot of the jobs that they do are escorting Chinooks, the RAF Chinooks, the big twin rotor heavy lift helicopters, which are a massive target. And also they are the prized target of the Taliban. Their ambition is to shoot down as many Chinooks as they can. So the Apaches operate as a 2-ship escorting the Chinooks in and out of these tiny landing zones in various outposts, which are usually surrounded by hostiles. And it's fascinating reading. And it's a typical British/military understatement that the only excessive adjectives ever used are when he's describing how other people were brave or other troops were doing so well. It was never that himself. And it comes across really, really well in that case. And so one of the main parts of the book, or the highlights, is operating over Nowzad. They come under fire from a very, very skilled anti-aircraft gunner who's firing a Soviet ZSU-23 with 23 millimeter cannon, anti-aircraft cannon, and he's doing it very, very well. This guy obviously knows what he's doing. And so Ed and his other flight companions have to work out a way of still being able to operate. They just can't say, well, we're not going to go, and defeat this guy. And it all really hinges upon the first use by us of the Hellfire, which is the title of the book, the Hellfire missile, which stands for Helicopter Fire and Forget Missile, and he gets permission, and he attacks with the Hellfire. So it's terrific book, and had me gripped. And then at the end of it, the tour's over, and he goes home, and he's expecting to kind of have an easier time when, due to operational exigencies, he has to go back. And his second tour is the subject of the first book, which this video shows the picture of, which is just called Apache. That was his first book, but it's about the second tour. And he mentions the living conditions in Afghanistan. When they get into the cockpit, you can burn your hand on the control column because it's so hot if you're not careful. And operating at the extreme limits of the aircraft and also the extreme limits of the crew. There's a story, I don't know which of the books it's in, but when they used to come back to refuel and rearm the aircraft, the ground crew would pass them a brew and a bacon sandwich, bacon banjo. And this was their little treat, and that would refuel the crew. And then one day they land and they get their brew, but no bacon banjo. And it turns out the health and safety have said that having bacon sandwiches in the sun can lead to an infection, and it's dangerous. Flying over places like Lashkar is not dangerous, but eating a bacon sandwich is. But Ed does emphasize the point that they were living in luxury compared to what the ground troops were living in the outposts and FOBs. So, that's a serious point. And the environmental conditions, like every time they came into land, they were landing in a dust storm, a sandstorm, and no visibility, and it took a lot of skill to do that because there's other helicopters on the ground, you're landing in between them. The highlight, excuse me, of this book, the second book, the first book on the second tour, is the rescue or the attempted rescue of Marine Matthew Ford at the Jugroon Fort. And there was a battle at the fort, and one of the troops from 4-2 Commando, Royal Marines, had been wounded, and they could see his body lying there on the different imaging that they had and the airborne assets. So what to do? Anyway, they cut a long story short, the Apache guys decide that what they propose doing is land 2 Apaches and with 3 Marines strapped to the outside, to the stubby wings, using a strop, a procedure which was an emergency method of extracting a downed pilot, never envisaged for this particular tactic. The Marines would jump off, go and rescue Marine Ford, bring him back, strap him on to the hard point, and then off they'd go, surrounded by Taliban. So they do this, and it's an amazing piece of military writing. Just what happened. It ends up with the air crew also getting out and with their weapons, because they carry weapons on the aircraft, and having to fight. When they get back, one of the senior officers more or less threatens them with court-martial for this unauthorized activity. But then the battlespace commander, the number one, he'd authorized it and smoothed it over. And Ed Macey ended up being awarded an MC, and the other chaps were also similarly decorated. Fantastic piece. It should be a movie, really. And so the 2 books together, they complement each other, and they tell a fascinating story about fighting and flying at the very, very edge of human performance in one of the most dangerous environments on earth. Terrific books, and I really urge you to read them.